Well, hello and welcome to Story 2019. Thank you all so much for coming. I'm aware we've still got people queuing outside, so I hope you can hear my voice through your microphone, those of you who I can't see. Welcome, I'm Naomi. I'm a fourth year at Castle studying physics, and I'll be your host for the Story Lunchtimes the whole way through this week. Just to let you know, before we get started, if there is a fire, which we really hope there won't be, we'll just leave through the exits and gather on the field out there. And if you need the toilet at any time, we have portaloos out behind the marquee. So today we are looking at a story for the skeptical, why God is more than a fable for the feeble. These story lunchtimes are a chance to examine and question the Christian faith and to consider how it impacts our story. And so how we're going to do that is we'll have a 20-minute talk from our guest speaker for the week, Glynn. And after that, we'll have a time for questions and answers. I will be taking some questions from the floor, but also you can text in your questions during the talk. And there will be a number on the screen, which I'm just going to read it out anyway, just in case. So it will be 07519 684 824. And it should come up in the corner of the PowerPoint slides as well, if you didn't catch that. So do be texting in your questions during the talk, and we'll come back to them afterwards. So without further ado, I'll invite Glynn up. Can we give him a round of applause?
Thanks. Hi, folks. Well, thank you so much. It's great that to see so many here. And my name's Glynn. As Naomi said, I'm a shrink by background. I was professor of psychiatry in Bristol, and that's why this title has a particular interest for me, and I hope for you as well. Now, a couple of weeks ago, if you, like me, had other things to do on a Sunday evening, you probably didn't spend the time watching the BAFTA awards ceremonies from the Royal Albert Hall. But a newspaper story about one of the winners next day caught my attention. Letitia Wright, and if we can just get, there she is, Letitia Wright, the Guyanese-born British actor who shot to fame for her role in Black Panther. If you saw it, she landed the prestigious BAFTA Rising Star Award. And in her acceptance speech, she spoke about her identity as a Christian, what we were talking about on Monday morning, in fact, Monday lunchtime. She said this, I identify myself as a child of God, and I can't get up here to receive this award without thanking God. I was in the dark, going through so many bad things, she said. I needed to take a break from acting because I idolized it. And elsewhere, she told how somebody invited her to an actor's Bible study. Maybe they were using Uncover, the Bibles that you have in front of you, or the Gospels. Who knows? But having stopped acting for a while, she said, while I went on a journey in this Bible study to discover a relationship with God, and I became a Christian. Well, what a great story. Or is it? Because to some of you here, it kind of makes the point, doesn't it? Christianity is, it's fine for those who need it, who still think they need an imaginary friend, for the psychological crutch it provides to those who can't take on life in its own terms, for people who don't possess the emotional ballast to face up to life, stand up straight, put their shoulders back, and get out and make something of the world. They're just dependent. Well, good for you. You're thinking, Letitia, I just don't have the need. And here we are again in the marketplace of ideas. And in this talk, we're going to look briefly at a couple of ideas going around that try to use psychology to explain religious commitment and belief in much the way I've just described. So first and briefly, what do we make of the idea that Christianity is for the emotionally needy? In fact, there's a surprising amount of data out there on this, and if you want to look at some of it, give you some references at the end, do come and talk to me. And here's the thing, the data shows that rather than exposing people with religious beliefs as emotionally needy, the vast majority of studies report a link between religious commitment and better mental health. Now, there are lots of questions about why this might be, but for the moment, we just need to note the headline. The headline is, despite Christianity always acting as a magnet for the disadvantaged, those at the bottom of the heap. There's no real evidence, despite that Christian faith acts as a marker for psychological vulnerability. There just isn't. This isn't to say that people don't often come into faith at times of emotional crisis, stress, but this may be because at times of personal crisis, our normative beliefs about how the world works get interrupted and disrupted. People become more open at these times to facing some hard truths about themselves. Maybe you've been through that kind of crisis where so much that you took for granted about the world was now up for grabs and to be questioned. And facing up to hard truths about yourself isn't a sign of weakness, it can be a sign of strength. So I don't see a lot of mileage in this idea that Christianity has been designed for the emotionally crippled. But let's have a look at one of the other interesting psychological explanations for religious belief going the rounds at the moment. And this one is built around the idea of evolutionary mechanisms. And it goes like this. We know that even though attendance at churches and formal expressions of religious belief has seen a massive decline in the West in recent decades, people are still very spiritual. Look at this survey carried out by the Theos think tank. They commissioned Comres to carry out. So it's a population-based representative sample of people, and they found that 70% of those people agree things in life that cannot be explained through science or other means. 59% believe in spiritual beings. 76% of people out there on this representative sample of the population believe in spiritual realms. 39% have undergone a tarot card reading, star sign reading. 55% pray sometimes. And these kind of spiritual beliefs don't seem, with increasing secularization, to be on the decline. In fact, here's a comparable data from a Gallup poll in 1990. You can see, and this is in the States, people who believe in ghosts, about 25% in 1990. It's gone up in 2001 to 35%. Now, I'm not making a lot out of the rise, but I'm just saying that as secularization's increased, there's no sense that we're becoming less spiritual. And superstitions and a belief in hidden meanings behind things isn't confined either to the uneducated and the gullible, people who believe in this kind of stuff. Here's the last president of the United States. And listen to what one of his staffers said about something that happened during his run for the presidency, when he was going caucus by caucus through the states seeking to gain their nomination. This staffer said this, he's here playing with him. He said, he played ball on the morning of the Iowa caucuses and won that election. He skipped playing ball on the morning of New Hampshire and Nevada and lost. Was there a connection, we asked. We've played ball in every primary since, you see. Now, here you've got the future president of the United States playing ball because he thinks it might influence the outcome of elections. Now, of course, if you push him, he'll say, of course, I don't actually believe that with my head. Now I've got my rational mind back in control, but my instincts, my heart, my emotions lean me into looking for hidden meanings, and I'll play safe. Let's play ball. So what's going on here? Why are we so incurably spiritual? Well, the story goes something like this. The brain has evolved so that when we're born, we're already primed to look at the world in certain ways. We don't come in like a blank slate. The mind is already working in certain ways, and it's primed to look for certain things and to look at the world in certain ways. And there's lots we could say about this. It makes a great bigger lecture, actually, but I've only got time to mention one of them. One of the ways in which we're primed is that we are pattern seekers. The brain seems to be intolerant of incompleteness. It doesn't like loose ends. It doesn't like incomplete parts. And these are the kind of data that people marshal in support of this. And this is the world famous, perhaps the most popular, the most well-known illusion, the Knitzer triangle. And here's an example as you're seeing that triangle in the middle that isn't there. It's an example of the brain looking for the whole amidst the parts. In fact, if you do an MRI study of people undertaking this task, you can see that the brain appears to be filling in that triangle. It's almost filling in the lines. It's intolerant of incompleteness. It wants to see the pattern. So why has the brain evolved in this way? Why did you come into the world with this tendency to look for patterns? Well, so the story goes, because it has survival value. I mean, look at this baboon. He's keeping a lookout while the others are feeding. He's scanning his environment, looking for trouble. A movement in the grass here, a rustle in the bushes there. What's the pattern? What's going on? 99 times out of 100, the answer is nothing. So why isn't this pattern-seeking behavior, why he's wasting his time, why isn't it deselected out? Because 1 in 100 times, there is something going on. And the lioness springs out, and he's ready, and he warns the others, and they're off, and she goes home with an empty stomach. And you see, the benefit of getting it right 1 in 100 times outweighs the disadvantages in evolutionary terms of getting it wrong 99 times. Now, what's all this got to do with spirituality? Well, the theory is that spirituality is the price we pay for having evolved these tendencies to look for hidden meanings. It's a byproduct of our tendency to scan our environment looking for strange things just in case. It's a neat idea. Does it stack up? Got to make up your own mind. But for me, I think it's a big jump from what this baboon is doing to the really complex, multi-leveled, higher cognitive processes involved in all of this thing that we call religious commitment. You know, I'm all for economy of explanation, but this is a big stretch in my book at any rate. Think of all the dimensions, the power of music to move the soul, to lift the heart. The awestruck experience of watching the sun rising over the horizon. The compassion that makes somebody lay down her life for her friend. Conviction after looking carefully into the evidence for the claims of Jesus Christ that he was indeed who he said he was and that he rose from the dead. Is all of this reducible to the evolved patternicity of the human mind? For me, that's unbelievable. An alternative view, and you don't have to believe it, but for me it makes more sense, is that we are spiritual beings because that is how we have indeed been designed by God. As the great theologian Augustine said, our hearts are restless as human beings until they find their rest in thee, O Lord. Or as one of the ancient Bible writers said, he said, God has put eternity. Let's get that again. God has put eternity, or set eternity in the hearts of men. That's why on a starry night something says, what why is it possible that God is there? And here's something to think about. You can't reasonably explain other people's beliefs on the basis of these kind of mechanisms whilst protecting your own beliefs from similar criticism, can you? What if your ideas are simply evolved representations of the world that carry survival value? How do you know that what you're thinking as you sit here listening to this is a true representation of reality, or something that has evolved a way of construing reality that just helps you survive? You can't explain why somebody else's belief, you can't explain away somebody else's belief on the basis of influences from which you yourself are somehow immune. It cuts both ways, and that's fair. So, in a way, quite rightly, you came here to say, well, what are the... Tell me about how you understand what we know to be some of the psychological influences behind belief. And I'd want to say, can we talk as well about some of the psychological influences behind unbelief? It cuts both ways. It's only fair. So, take the well-known psychological phenomenon of... oh, wow, these are playing with us. Let's try again. No one's pressing the buttons over there, are they? Let's try again. Doesn't want to play that one, does it? Confirmation bias, still there. Good. So the well-known psychological phenomenon of confirmation bias, you've all heard of this, I think. There's pretty good evidence that the mind tends to pay attention to those things that confirm what we already know. I'd love to show you some experiments on this. And this is a well-established, it's a mind trap. We tend to much prefer hearing things that we already agree with, and we pay attention to those things that confirm what we already agree with. And there are things you need, if you want to be sensible and to engage with the world realistically, you've got to be aware of your confirmation bias, and there are things you can do to try and combat it. But it cuts both ways. So once you've made up your mind, you're an atheist, you develop a structure of social relationships with people of similar views, it's really hard to come along to a meeting like this with an open mind. We're looking for data that supports our existing beliefs rather than those that challenge them. None of us is immune from these psychological influences and processes. Now, this week we've been looking at the person of Jesus, and it turns out he had quite a lot to say about mind traps that blind us to reality. The most important one was pride. Pride, which puts ourselves in the best light, that says no to God and the authority of the creator of the worlds and says yes to me. That shifts the responsibility elsewhere, that turns the cruel act of deception involved in having an affair into something I call making a mistake. Pride, which tells us we don't need God's forgiveness. It's a made-up story for those who do. Well, look at Mark 2, verse 17 with me, will you? In these, if you just want to grab that, uncover. This is Mark's eyewitness account of the life of Jesus. And I'm looking at page 8. And I'm reading this. Page 8 from verse 13. Chapter 2, verse 13. Once again, Jesus went out beside the lake. A large crowd came to him, and he began to teach them. As he walked along, he saw Levi, son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax collector's booth. Follow me, Jesus told him. And Levi got up and followed him. While Jesus was having dinner at Levi's house, many tax collectors and sinners were eating with him and his disciples, for there were many who followed him. When the teachers of the law, who were Pharisees, saw him eating with the sinners and tax collectors, they asked his disciples, "Why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners?" On hearing this, Jesus said to them, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but those who are ill. I've not come to call the righteous, but sinners." Now what's happening here? 3 quick points. First, did you see how the good news of the gospel of the Christian faith is really for everybody? We've already seen Jesus calling ordinary fishermen. Soon a terrorist will be joining his gang, Jesus' followers. And here we've got a hated Roman collaborator, a tax collector. Most of them were racketeers as well. And Jesus seems to have a whole clutch of these people in tow. And that's the first point. It's for everyone. And then second, do you notice the reaction of the religious dignitaries of the day? So consumed with what was wrong in other people's lives, they were blind to what was going on in their own. Why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners? They demand. What kind of a holy man, if that's what he thinks he is, would ever allow himself to be tainted by these people? And third, notice how Jesus responds. It's not the healthy who need a doctor, he says. Not come to call the righteous. Sinners. Now, Jesus isn't saying that these religious people aren't sinners too. Oh no, he's not saying that. Far from it. He's saying that their pride is blinding them to their sin. And so there's nothing he can do for them. So I wonder whether you'd open to this idea. Most of us would tend to, if we're thinking about God's judgment, God's view of our lives, would tend actually to put ourselves on the side of those religious dignitaries. You know, if there's a day of judgment, it's going to be great for the racketeers and the murderers and the scum who screw the life out of the little people and oppress the little people. Well, there's going to be a big day of reckoning. As Mary learned, he'll cast down the mighty from their thrones when the coming of Jesus was announced, and he'll raise up the poor. There's not one of us thinks that's a bad idea, I hope. And we put ourselves on the side of the good guys. What Jesus is saying here is none of us, none of you are good guys. Look in your own heart. And maybe Letitia Wright is saying something to us here. What if she hasn't found a fable for the feeble? She's found a savior for her soul. And now she's not standing before a huge television audience at the BAFTA speaking out of weakness. She's speaking out of strength. I identify, she said, as a forgiven child of God. That is what defines me. That is who I am. That is what has changed my life. And I wonder whether you'd be open to putting your own confirmation bias under the spotlight and to look at the claims of Jesus for yourself. Come back tonight as Vaughan will take us through a bit more of his life. Try to set aside your preconceived ideas and look at Jesus. Take him on his own terms. Ask, who is this man? It might just be the greatest adventure of your life. Well, thanks very much. Naomi, let's hand back over to you.
I wasn't ready. I was so engaged. Okay. Before we get on to the Q&A, I just want to draw your attention to 3 things that will either have been on your tables or on your chairs. You might be sitting on them. You might put them onto your chairs. Can I just pop this?
Oh, yeah.
Thanks. So the first one is the book that we were just looking at. This is Uncover Mark. It is Mark's Gospel, one of the books in the Bible, and it's been put together with like study guides that you can go through either by yourself or with a friend. They're really good. I'm reading it through at the moment with a friend, and it's going really well. So I recommend doing that. Sorry, Glynn,
Oh, sorry.
access to these.
Yeah, you can.
The second one is these Connect cards, the little green ones. We would love to hear from you. So if you have any comments about what you've heard today, if you want us to get in touch with you, if you want to get in touch with us, then do just fill these out and put them in the boxes on your way out later. If you do put your personal details on there, just tick the box at the bottom, and that lets us know that you're happy for us to use those details to get in contact with you. And then the final thing is these flyers with the schedule of events for the week. So we're almost at the end of the week, sad, but there's still 3 events left. So tonight we're here at 7:15 with Stories of Love. How can a terrorist say he is going to heaven? So we'll be hearing an interview with David, who is an ex-UVF activist, which should be really interesting, as well as a talk on selfless love, another live performance from the Get Down, and movie snacks. And then tomorrow we're back for lunch at the same time, same place, with a story for today with Glynn again, why following Jesus won't steal your sanity. So do come along to those and make the most of this while we're still here this week. I'm going to start with a question from the text, and then I'm going to come to the floor. So do be thinking if you've got a question you'd like to ask. So this is, I think this came in quite early on in the talk. So when does spirituality become Christianity? Or maybe why make that switch?
Right, yes. When does spirituality become Christianity? Spirituality becomes Christianity when those kind of feelings of spiritual connection are fleshed out with content, with meaning. Spirituality it covers a vast, doesn't it, kind of range of experiences. You don't have to be a Christian to experience those spiritual instincts, spiritual feelings. And that's why, in a way, I'd say it's something to do with our humanity. It's because God made us in his image for himself that we have these spiritual yearnings, but because in the Christian story, we turned our back on God, we said no to his rule, we're disconnected. But the kind of instincts, the yearnings, the longings still bubble up from time to time. When we put ourselves on the top of a mountain, when you look into the stars, when you encounter great beauty or a symphony, suddenly you sense you're connecting with something beyond. Now, that isn't Christianity, but it could be an intimation, a kind of a clue, a draw. Christianity is centered in Jesus, who he was, and it's in him that all our spiritual instincts and longings find their rest, their completion, their explanation. And the problem with spirituality is that it can be a way of saying, well, I want kind of spiritual experiences, but I want to be in control. I want them to line up. I remember there's, if you've Googled at some point, Sheilaism, there's little short-term internet thing called Sheilaism, and Sheila said, my spirituality, it's called Sheilaism, and her name was Sheila. So it kind of makes this point that it's about me, whereas Christianity is a radical confrontation of that, which he calls sin. And it says, no, it's about him. That's the one in whom we find our rest and our completion as human beings.
Thank you, Glynn. As you were talking, I've received a ton more questions. We will
Great,
have time to go through lots of these, and we will take a break for those of you who need to get to lectures in a little while. But before I get onto these, is there anyone that would like to ask a question from the floor? We have a roaming mic we can bring over.
Come on, there must be pushback, guys. Let's have some pushback. Really happy. And can I just say as well, I love it. If you want to come down, have a chat, just say hello, ask a few more questions, push back a bit. You know, I didn't quite get that, or what do you mean by, or I thought this was strange. Please do come and chat as well.
Yeah, definitely. Anyone want to ask? Don't have to. I can get one from the phone.
Let's get them from the
we've
phone.
got one in the middle. Thanks.
I feel sorry for all the guys outside in the overflow there, kind of excluded. Okay, they're waving, so they're with us. Right, yes, please.
Hi. ask, you said that the different, when you go from spirituality to Christianity, it's kind of based on finding a context and finding a meaning, but could this not also apply to other religions like Islam or Judaism or Buddhism in the same way? Because you do find a context for religions as well.
Absolutely, yeah. As I said, we're in the marketplace of ideas, and that's what a university is. And there'll be people who have follow other faiths, other ways of understanding the world. And certainly, they would say that this is what I believe, and this is where I am. What I think all I'm asking you to do is I put up my stall here, and I want to talk about Jesus, who I believe is the life of the world. And I do believe he is the only Son of God, and he is God's final word to us. So I'm not a relativist. I don't think that it all washes out the same in the end. I really think Christianity is true. But I deeply respect, and I'll fight for someone's freedom, set up their stall, and say, well, I don't think it is, because this is my faith, or that's my faith. So let's have a conversation. But I'm here really to talk about the one who I think is God's final word when God himself became a man, talked to us. So.
Yeah, thank you, Glynn.
That's a great point. Thank you.
Do come up to, thank you for your question, and do come up to chat to Glynn later about that if you'd like to. I'm going to do one more from the phone, and then we'll take a break. So this is regarding the passage that we read in Mark. It seems to say that if you don't follow Jesus, then you are ill. That seems harsh and wrong for an all-loving God.
Right, yeah, I don't think Jesus is just using illness as a kind of a metaphor at that point. He's just saying there's a sickness of the soul, which sin, this twist, what do we call it? I keep calling it the HPTSU, the human propensity to screw up. That's the HPTSU. That is what brought the Son of God into the world, that there's this twist in our soul, the HPTSU. And we all know it. When you put it like that, you think, I screw up all the time. I bark at my best friends. I'm deceitful. I'm mean. It's that twist in the soul that put us apart from God and that he came to put right. It's not in any way saying that people who are sick are somehow more sinful. It's not that connection. Jesus is just using that as a metaphor for the kind of sickness of the soul. I'm a doctor. I wouldn't have spent my life particularly fighting for mentally ill people who are the most excluded people. And we need to fight for their rights. I wouldn't be doing that if I felt somehow that they would lower down the sin pecking order than somebody else. I wouldn't want to do that.
We've just had one more text. I'm just going to ask now because I feel like it's just grabbed my attention. What do you have? What do you think of former Christians? Do you have anything that you'd like to say to them? I'm voicing that because I know there are probably a few people in this room who maybe used to go to church or used to have some sort of would say they had some sort of Christianity, and maybe skepticism has come in later. Yeah. And I would just like to give you a chance to sort of respond to that.
Yeah, I'd really respect what may have led you out of faith, in fact, because God, in the Christian story, God, he's looking for people like Levi, tax collectors, the hoods, the baddies. He loves people at the bottom of the heap. He loves complicated people. Come to me, all you are weary. He's got that kind of thing about people who have real need, and they will come into churches, and we're all a work in progress when we become Christians. That's what a disciple means, a follower of Christ. You start the journey, and we screw up still. That's why whenever we come to church, we say sorry, because we continue to screw up as part of this journey, learning how to be more like God. So perhaps someone screwed you up, and I just say, if they did, look beyond that, look through that, and back to the person who initially caught your imagination. You said, I want to follow him. And I'd love it if you see this as an opportunity to reconnect with that first love, that first thing that brought you into faith. Don't let other Christians, tax collectors, sinners put you off either.
Thank you, Glynn. Yeah, and if that was your question, I particularly want to encourage you to take that Uncover mark back, have a read through, consider it again for yourself and see what you think. We are going to take a break now. For those of you who need to head off to lectures, feel free to do that. But we will continue with Q&A for another 15 or 20 minutes, so do stick around for that, or head into the cafe.
Sorry.
No, that's all right. I'm going to start with a question from the text, and then we'll maybe come to the floor. Where did it go? Okay, so this one grabbed my attention. If the human mind is geared towards survival rather than discerning what is the truth, how can we make definitive statements about truth if the instrument by which we determine truth isn't ultimately designed to answer the question?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'd say yes. If you use evolutionary theory at that level, give it that level of explanatory power for these higher level cognitive processes, that's exactly the problem. Just read it again. I mean, I agree with this. That was the kind of point I was hoping to make. Thank you for.
If the human mind is geared towards survival rather than discerning truth, how can we make definitive statements about truth if the instrument by which we determine truth isn't ultimately designed to answer the question?
Exactly. So, how do you know even that your representations of reality that you have in your head have not simply been allowed into your head because they have survival value? They're part of the end part of a process of survival. And you can't actually know whether what you see and know is connects with reality at all. Maybe it's just got survival value, and that's the way evolution has arranged it. I think it's a stretch too far as an explanation, but also I don't know about you, I couldn't live with that as a philosophy of life. No one lives consistently with that. We all sense in ourselves an ability to make up our own minds about things in the end. And that I think is part of our dignity and our uniqueness as people made in the image of God.
Great, thank you, Glynn. I'm just acknowledging that there are quite a few texts on here that are about topics we have covered this week. I may well ask some of them, but I do just want to draw your attention, just to quickly recap. We've so far looked at identity when being myself isn't enough. We've looked at achievement and finding our worth in that, so why you're worth more than your achievements. We've looked at suffering, making sense of life's toughest times. And then I'm aware that today, by looking at this idea of a story for the skeptical, your skepticism may well feed into many of those things that we've already looked at. So I'd encourage you to have a look at the videos. We have videos up from the talks that are on YouTube. So I would encourage you to keep asking those questions and get a fuller picture of Glynn's answers from looking at his...
Come and grab me at the end.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, definitely. Is there anyone that would like to ask a question from the floor? Yeah.
Hello.
Hopefully it'll come up. Yeah, far away.
This might feed into other things. Apologies if it does. So you accept this spiritualism. You accept that you've got this kind of spiritual need. Why do we then have to make, or I say have to, why do we then make the religious commitment? Why do we then go to church, pray, all that kind of stuff? Why do we do that? Why can't we just accept that there is this higher power and that kind of thing? Why can't we accept the beliefs without having to do all the stuff that comes with it?
Okay, that's great. So thank you. So what in the Christian story, I think you're saying, in the Christian story, why does it work in a way that once you've in a way encountered God in this big way, this deep way, this sense of being flooded by grace and forgiveness and given a new identity, why, for goodness sake, does that have to lead you then, next step, into a church? You know, why is there that kind of set of requirements? And I think the point is that Jesus, when he kicks off his, in fact, in the story we saw today, he passes Levi, he says, "Follow me." And becoming a Jesus follower isn't simply a state. It's a kind of a qualitative thing, a thing I am or aren't. It's an active thing as well. It's a process of following him. So how do you learn how to follow him? You kind of rub shoulders with other followers as well. Just makes sense in that way. So churches are simply expressions of the need we have. If we're going to grow as Christians, become better disciples of Jesus, we club together, we get together with other Christians, and we learn together through, and in the Christian story, God's Spirit actually works through communities of Christians, and particularly gives people in those communities particular gifts to help build up the community. So some people are teachers, some are really good shepherds, pastors, and there are these kind of gifts in a community that kind of works together. It's ideal. The HTP SU gets to work, and churches can be struggling places, and I'm going to come clean on that. And Christians have done some pretty ropey things through our history. Not all of them are. Many of those haven't been really, I'd say, true Christians, but even true Christians have done some ropey things. So I'd go with that. But that's another reason being in a church, I'd hope, because when I do some ropey things, hopefully someone will come along and challenge me about that. So it's a part of a growth thing. Do you want to come back, or does that kind of, yeah, okay.
Cool. Would anyone else like to ask a question? Thank you for your question, by the way. It was great.
As someone in the sort of scientific industry, which is sometimes seen to be incompatible with religious beliefs, have you ever felt any sort of personal skepticism or anything? Just thought I'd
Great question. No, thank you. And can I say, are you a follower of Christ? Are you can I ask? Right, okay, thanks. Sorry, I just wanted to get a sense of where that was coming from. Have I felt? Yeah, all the time. All the time. Because the nature of faith is that it's not a cast iron kind of thing, in the sense that the evidence is in comprehensively. I've got all the information to hand, everything's done, Having said that, as a scientist, is it ever? If you're a Popperian, you're constantly wanting to test your hypothesis. So even as a scientist, there's a big load of doubt in there. And in fact, Richard Horton, the editor of The Lancet, so the executive editor, The Lancet's a really prestigious medical journal. He said 3 years ago, the reality we have to face, given some of the methodological issues and flaws that we've encountered in so many studies in recent years, is, and I'm quoting him, possibly a half of what we think we know as being true is in fact false. And that's in medical research, So I'd say, I get skeptical. I hope not cynical. I think that's a really negative thing. But skepticism is you ask the questions. Does this add up? But it's not as if scientists don't have that as well, is it? The nature of science is you're always being skeptical about what you think you know. I have moments when I say, does this add up? Especially when there's suffering, and I can't make sense of particular situations. Does this add up? Have those moments. Overall, the answer keeps coming back, yes, the God I follow, I know enough of him to trust for the things I don't understand. I think that's the way I look at it. Thanks so much for...
Yeah, thank you. We just had a few more texts in, so I'll take one of them. It was mentioned that you didn't understand how religion could be explained by the human brain looking for patterns, for example, with the baboon example, because you believe this to be too big a leap. But just because it's a big leap, why does that make that explanation untrue? I wouldn't say that the size of the leap means that something is true or untrue.
Well, we could, I suppose, toss the ball around on that one. I think the observation is perfectly valid. I do think that there is patternicity in the brain. I do think that we see patternicity at work at this lower level here amongst baboons. So in terms of the processes by which human beings have developed as spiritual creatures, I could see these evolutionary processes at work in there. So I'm not saying I'd reject all of that. I think it's just far too simplistic to reduce these high-level cognitive processes to that one particular mechanism. It's a bit like, schizophrenia. 30 years ago, people were saying, oh yeah, we'll find the gene any time now. Schizophrenia is one of the areas of my research that I was most interested in. And we'll find the gene. 30 years later, there's no single gene. There's 30 genes of small effect interact. It's really complex. So I'm very skeptical of these oversimplified solutions for something as complex as a human being and these high-level behaviors.
Yeah, thank you. There's a couple more questions I'd like to ask from the phone. One is, how do we know that Jesus really existed historically, and how can we be sure that his miracles took place?
I'm hoping to touch on this a bit more tomorrow, actually, but you've just got to go. You've got to go to the best records that we have, and they are, in fact, the Gospels that we have, which were written surprisingly close to the life of Jesus, particularly compared with other sources. And the old story used to be that basically this Jesus, he evolved out of the needs of the early church to have somebody who was as powerful and strong and could heal people, and to have a myth that really worked for them. And so they basically manufactured much of this stuff, and it was all written a century or two later. Those ideas were very prevalent at the turn of last century, the 19th century, the 20th century, 19th, 20th. As more information came to hand, particularly carbon dating of some fragments, it's found that these Gospels are much, much earlier, probably written within 30 years of Jesus' death, one of them certainly. And Paul's letters were being written within 30 years of Jesus' death. So this is a short time. I mean, I can think 20 years ago, and I can just remember some of the things that were happening. So I do think that the Gospels, the dating of them should get us thinking. There are also other sources outside the Gospel where this man called Jesus is mentioned, Roman historian, and so on. And then I think if you read the Gospels themselves, they've got a ring of truth about them. I mean, just put it to the test. There's a lot of excitement about these Gospels of Thomas and all these new Gospels they've discovered. Honestly, if you read them, Jesus is is so mythical in them. It has such a made-up feel to it. And then read these Gospels, and it just rings true. So I think the evidence for Jesus, you put together different sources of information. For me, I found myself coming out of that saying, I think that's pretty good evidence on the whole for his existence. Say a bit more about that tomorrow,
thank you.
maybe.
Yeah. Would anyone like to ask a question from the floor? Yeah.
It's quite a short one. Are there any more recent than that? Because I know you say, 20 years, I can remember 20 years ago. Well, I can't because I'm only 21, but... but are there not ones written when he was around? That for me would be more, I don't know, more evidence. Were there any written as he was going around doing these things?
No. You've got to remember, these communities were much more oral than our own. I mean, getting writing paper wasn't very, very easy. So there wasn't what we do have is based on oral traditions that had developed amongst Christians at the time. But certainly within Judaism, within Jewish culture, they attached a lot of importance to accuracy because they so valued the notion of truth in Jewish community. And so it would be likely that these oral traditions were quite close. And certainly within, Paul's letters, and take Acts, in one of his letters, Paul says, 500 people saw Christ at one time resurrected. Go and ask them and check it out. So within the community, there would have been this process of cross-validation going on. None of these are killer arguments. At the end, you come to the evidence and you say, well, if God has spoken, and he's spoken in his word, would it look like this? I think it kind of would. And it makes sense to me to believe that there's something sacred about these documents, as well as the kind of evidence I'm talking to in my book stacking up. But you've got to make up your mind for yourself. This is a good little book, and I think these are free. It's Jesus for Skeptics by Michael Green. And some of these issues are covered in a bit more detail. And it's a really thin book, but it's well written, and it covers skeptical about, it's called skeptical about whether Jesus ever lived, that kind of thing. And he quotes the various sources that you can. So please grab one of those, wouldn't you? Or as we would say here, do be grabbing one of these.
We've got a ton of books that you can just pick up for free in the corner over here. Sorry, how do I describe it? Out in the cafe, but on this side at the back. The Search have a ton of books that you can take. I'll take another one from Tex. There's a couple that had a sort of a similar thing. Where did they go? Okay, so this is the general question. Do you think that atheists and people with different faiths can have access to heaven? And someone else made a comment. Being Christian seems to claim that you have a strong belief about afterlife, whereas people's spirituality is something that's seen more in the present. Just sort of like general questions about the afterlife.
Atheists, can they have access to heaven? You bet. You know, in the sense that Jesus came for everybody. I think if what you're saying is, can somebody who says, I don't believe in God, have access to heaven? I think that's kind of hard, because you'd have to change. You wouldn't be an atheist anymore, would you? There's a kind of a logical incoherence about the question. So if that was your question, though, please, I want to try and understand a bit more what you're saying there. But as Vaughan said a couple of days ago, you know, the notions of heaven and hell, they're pictures given in Scripture, but basically they boil down to heaven being about being home with God, and hell being about being home with what you put in his place, yourself, kind of terrible loneliness. And it's our choice. And no one would be in hell who hasn't chosen that in a way. The Christian gospel is doors wide open. And hell is for those who just say, no, thank you. And so what was the other one?
It was
spirituality is now. I think I'd want to contest that. I think Christianity is for now, big time, because what Jesus is doing, for example, in his healings, is he's giving a foretaste of heaven, and basically, or ultimately, his kingdom that's coming on earth, when there'll be a new heaven and new earth, that there will be an end of the world in this Christian story. So we're in the in-between times. There will be an end of the world leading to the last judgment, the rolling up of time and space as we understand it, and a kind of a renewed heaven and earth that's beyond my imagining. I'd imagine it's beyond yours as well. But when Jesus healed, what he was saying is that this is what that kingdom is about. And now to his disciples, he said, go out and give everybody a taste of that kingdom, which is why Christians have always established hospitals wherever they've gone. They've always felt a sense of being sent to the bottom of the heap, because that's in God's own heart. So it's not just spirituality that's for now. The gospel and its claim on us, its call to us, is big time for now, I think. That's why I'm standing here this week, because this is part of, for me, of God's calling to me to have a go, share my faith.
Yeah, definitely.
And
if you chat to anyone here who's wearing a story jumper, or maybe you have a friend who's a Christian who brought you, ask them that question. Say, how has believing in Jesus changed your life now, rather than just giving you a pass into heaven. Grill them on it. Ask them what their story is. That's what this week is about. Okay. Do we have another question from the floor?
think we're done. We're done.
Yeah, I've lost myself a little bit in the in the different texts and which ones I've asked and which ones I haven't. So I know we still have quite a few. So if you do have a question that you'd like to be answered or you'd like to discuss or maybe come back at Glynn about something and debate with him, I'm sure he'd love that. He'll be here. Also, if you want to hang around, we're gonna have the cafe free for the next half hour. It's now pretty much 2:20, so 10 to 3. If you get a coffee up until then, it'll be free. So do stick around. Thank you so much for coming, for spending your lunchtime with us. It's been great. And do come and chat to Glynn if you'd like to. Thank you so much.